The notification didn't light up the room. It barely lit up the dashboard of the town car. But in the suffocating velvet darkness of the back seat, it was enough to burn my retina. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. We were gliding south on Fifth Avenue, the tires hissing against the rain-slicked asphalt. Inside the car, the air smelled of Mark's expensive scotch and my own Chanel No. 5, a scent combination that used to smell like success, but lately just smelled like exhaustion. "Great night," Mark said, loosening his bow tie with a practiced, weary elegance. He didn't look at me. He was looking out the window at the blurred lights of Central Park passing us by. The board seemed happy. "I think we secured the Henderson account." "You were charming," I replied. My voice was automatic. It was the voice of Elena Vance, the perfect wife, the poised interior designer, the woman who knew exactly which fork to use and how to laugh at a billionaire's unfunny joke without seeming sycophantic. "Mrs. Henderson adored you." "She's a shark," Mark muttered, finally turning to me. His eyes were blue, the kind of piercing blue that had stopped my heart 10 years ago in a lecture hall at Columbia. Now they were glassy, shielded by a layer of professional detachment. He patted my hand, his palm cool and dry. "But we played the game well, El. We always do." We played the game well. That was us, the Vances. We were a brand as much as a couple. We lived in a 4-bedroom penthouse in Tribeca that I had designed to be featured in Architectural Digest. We vacationed in the Hamptons in August and Aspen in January. We were the envy of every dinner party, the standard against which my friends measured their own messy, chaotic lives. Mark's phone buzzed again. It was sitting on the center console between us, face up. Usually Mark was careful. His phone was an extension of his body, always in his pocket or face down on the table. But tonight, the scotch had made him sloppy, or maybe arrogance had made him sloppy. He believed so thoroughly in the image we had created that he didn't think it could be challenged. The screen lit up. A message from a number not saved in his contacts. No name. Just a string of digits and a preview of the text that lingered for 3 seconds before fading to black. I'm still wearing it. The silk one. My heart didn't race. That was the strange part. In the movies, the wife gasps. Her hand flies to her mouth, she screams. I did none of those things. My heart actually seemed to stop. A heavy, cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. The silence in the car expanded, pressing against my eardrums. "Who's texting you at midnight?" I asked. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. Mark glanced at the phone, then at me. There was a microsecond of hesitation, a flicker in his eyes that I would have missed if I hadn't spent a decade memorizing his face. Then the mask slid back into place. "Just Robert," he said, reaching for the phone and sliding it into his jacket pocket. "Panic about the Asian markets opening. You know how he gets." "Ah," I said, "Roberts." Roberts was a 60-year-old managing director with a gout problem and a vocabulary that consisted mostly of market jargon. I doubted Roberts was wearing silk at midnight. I turned my head to the window, watching the rain streak horizontally across the glass. The city looked beautiful and hostile, a canyon of steel and glass where millions of people were hiding millions of secrets. I felt a sudden, violent urge to open the door and tuck and roll onto the wet pavement, just to feel something real. Just to break the hermetically sealed bubble of our life. The car pulled up to our building. The doorman, Henry, was there with an umbrella before the wheels even stopped rolling. "Good evening, Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance." Henry beamed. "Good evening, Henry," I smiled. It was my gala smile. It hurt my cheeks. The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor was silent. Mark was checking his emails or pretending to. I watched his reflection in the polished brass doors. He was handsome. God, he was handsome. He had the jawline of a senator and the posture of a man who owned the room. I looked at myself next to him. My hair was swept up in an intricate chignon. My emerald gown was flawless. My diamonds caught the harsh overhead light. We looked like a wedding cake topper. Plastic, hollow. When we entered the apartment, the silence of the space hit me. It was a masterpiece of minimalism. Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, white leather furniture that looked too pristine to sit on. I had designed this place to be a sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. I'm going to grab a shower, Mark said, heading toward the master bedroom. I smell like cigar smoke. Okay, I said. I'll act as tech support for the coffee machine. In the morning, it was an inside joke. He usually laughed. Tonight, he just nodded and closed the bedroom door. I stood in the center of the living room, clutching my clutch bag so hard my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline was finally hitting me now. My hands started to tremble. I'm still wearing it. The silk one. The sentence looped in my mind, a toxic mantra. Who was she? Was it someone I knew? A colleague? A random encounter? And the silk one, what? A robe? Lingerie? The intimacy of the phrasing made bile rise in my throat. It wasn't just sex. You don't text, I'm still wearing it to a one-night stand. That was a message sent to a lover. That was a message meant to provoke a memory. I needed to know. The need was a physical hunger, sharp and demanding. I walked to the hallway. I could hear the shower running. Mark took long showers. I had 10 minutes. I went into the walk-in closet in the master suite. His jacket was draped over the valet stand. My breath caught in my throat. I felt like a criminal in my own home. I reached into the inner pocket. Empty. I checked the side pockets. Empty. I froze. He had taken the phone into the bathroom with him. I walked to the bathroom door. It was locked. Through the heavy oak, I could hear the water hitting the tiles, but I couldn't hear him moving. Was he texting her back? Was he telling her about the boring gala? Was he telling her he wished he was with her? I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the door. A wave of exhaustion crashed over me, so profound my knees almost buckled. This was it. This was the moment my life divided into before and after. Before was safety. Before was being the envy of Manhattan. After was this terrified woman pressing her ear against a bathroom door, hunting for clues of her own humiliation. I went back out to the living room and poured myself a glass of water from the carafe on the bar. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me, a woman in a green dress, standing in a tower of gold, utterly alone. I realized then that I wasn't going to confront him, not tonight. If I screamed now, he would deny it. He would say it was a spam text or a wrong number, or I was crazy. He was a lawyer by training. He could argue his way out of a murder charge, let alone a text message. No, I needed more. I needed concrete proof. I needed to be sure. But as I looked out at the lights of Jersey City across the black water, I knew I was already sure. The trust, once broken, doesn't shatter loudly like glass. It dissolves quietly, like sugar in hot tea, until it's gone, leaving the liquid bitter. The shower stopped. I quickly put the glass down and sat on the sofa, picking up a design magazine, pretending to read. Mark walked out a moment later, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair wet and spiked. He looked refreshed, innocent. "You're still up?" he asked. "Just unwinding," I said, not looking. Up from a page about mid-century modern chairs. He walked over and kissed the top of my head. He smelled of soap and peppermint toothpaste. "Don't stay up too late, honey. You have that presentation tomorrow." "I won't," I said. He walked into the bedroom. "Good night, Elle." "Good night, Mark." I waited until I heard the rustle of the sheets and the click of the bedside lamp. I sat there in the dark for a long time. I pulled out my own phone. I opened the calendar app. I looked at last Tuesday. Mark had said he had a late dinner with clients. I scrolled back 2 weeks. A networking event in Brooklyn. I scrolled back a month. An overnight trip to DC. Every entry now looked like a lie. Every late night, every uncharged phone, every shower taken immediately upon returning home. The architecture of my marriage was rotting from the inside out, and I had been too busy polishing the façade to notice the termites. I set the phone down. The city outside was relentless. A million lights burning for a million different reasons. Somewhere out there, a woman was wearing silk and waiting for a reply that my husband was probably typing under the covers right now. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, hard resolve settling in my chest, replacing the panic. "Okay, Mark," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's play." The morning sun hitting the white marble of our kitchen island was usually my favorite time of day. It was clean, bright, and promising. Today it felt like an interrogation lamp. I stood by the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid drip into the ceramic cup. My hands were steady, but my mind was vibrating at a frequency that felt like it might shatter my teeth. Mark walked in a moment later, buttoning the cuffs of his crisp blue shirt. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had slept the sleep of the righteous or the thoroughly satisfied. "Coffee smells good," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I didn't flinch. I forced myself to remain perfectly still, like a statue in a museum. "It's the new blend," I said. "Ethiopian." He took the cup I offered him. "You're the best. I have that breakfast meeting with the partners at 8, so I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." "Another late night?" I asked, turning back to the counter to wipe away a non-existent crumb. "You know how it is. Mergers and acquisitions don't sleep." He took a sip, checked his watch, and grabbed his briefcase. "Love you." "Love you too," I lied. The words tasted like ash. As the heavy front door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. I didn't move for a full minute. Then the paralysis broke. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was an auditor of my own life. I walked to the living room window and watched him exit the building. He didn't turn left toward the subway or hail a cab immediately. He stood on the corner, typing on his phone. He smiled, a small, private smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Then he hailed a taxi and vanished into the morning traffic. I went to his home office. It was a sacred space in our house, filled with mahogany and leather, smelling of cedar. I sat at his desk. I knew his passwords. We had always practiced total transparency, or so I thought. I opened his laptop. It was already logged in. I navigated to the shared American Express account. Mark was smart. He wouldn't use the joint card for a hotel room or jewelry. That was amateur hour. I was looking for patterns, for timestamps. I scrolled through the last 3 months. Uber, 11:45 p.m. Tuesday, Uber, 1:30 a.m. Thursday, Le Cuckoo, dinner for two, $480. Friday, 2 weeks ago. Mark had told me he was at a stag dinner for a colleague's retirement at a steakhouse in Midtown. Le Cuckoo was a romantic French restaurant in Soho, famous for its candlelight and intimacy. You didn't take a retiring colleague there for a steak. My finger hovered over the screen. There it was, a tiny crack in the narrative. I didn't print it. I didn't screenshot it. I just memorized it. Le Cuckoo, Friday the 14th. I closed the laptop exactly as I found it. I adjusted the chair back to his height. I fluffed the leather cushion. If I was going to catch him, I had to be a ghost. I couldn't leave footprints. By 10 o'clock, I was in a cab heading to Soho, but not to the restaurant. I had a job to do. My firm had taken on a massive project, renovating the ground floor and loft of a pre-war cast iron building on Green Street. The client wanted industrial chic, which usually meant spending a fortune to make things look intentionally unfinished. The elevator opened directly into the construction zone. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, wet plaster, and old timber. It was loud, drills whining, hammers banging, men shouting over the noise of a radio playing classic rock. Usually I love this part. I love seeing the transformation. Today the chaos just felt like a physical manifestation of my brain. "Mrs. Vance, watch your step." I froze. A large sheet of drywall was being maneuvered through the narrow hallway right in front of me. I stepped back, my heel catching on a loose tarp. I stumbled, flailing for balance. A hand caught my elbow. Firm, strong, covered in dust. "Easy there," a voice said. It was deep, rough, and devoid of the polished cadence of the Upper East Side. "We're not trying to kill the designer on day one. Bad for insurance." I righted myself and looked up. The man holding me was tall, wearing a faded gray t-shirt covered in plaster dust and dark work jeans. He had messy dark hair that looked like he ran his hands through it constantly, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of hazel, intelligent, critical, and amused. "I'm fine," I said, smoothing my dress. "Thank you." "You're Elena Vance?" he asked, letting go of my arm. He didn't wipe his hand on his pants first, and he just crossed his arms. "I am, and you are?" Julian Thorne. I'm the lead architect on the restoration. The contractor said you were coming to look at the lighting specs." Julian Thorne. I had seen the name on emails, but I pictured an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie. This man looked like he wrestled the buildings into submission with his bare hands. The lighting specs, yes, I said, trying to regain my composure. The client wants recessed lighting in the main beam? Julian laughed. It was a dry, short sound. The client wants a lot of things, but that beam is original 1890s timber. If we drill into it for recessed lighting, we compromise the structural integrity. It's rot-resistant, not idiot-resistant. I blinked. I wasn't used to being spoken to like that. In my world, no was wrapped in 3 layers of compliments and a suggestion for a more expensive alternative. The client is very specific, I countered, my voice sharpening. It's about the aesthetic, the flow. The aesthetic won't matter if the ceiling collapses, Julian said, turning and walking toward the center of the room. He gestured for me to follow. Come here, look at this. I followed him, stepping carefully over coils of wire. He pointed up at the exposed ceiling. See that? He pointed to a dark stain on the wood. Water damage from 20 years ago. Someone just painted over it instead of fixing the leak. It looks fine on the surface, right? White paint covers a multitude of sins. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. White paint covers a multitude of sins. I thought of Mark's smile this morning. I thought of my own smile in the mirror. But underneath, Julian continued, looking at me now, his gaze intense, it's soft. If you poke it, it crumbles. You can't just decorate over the rot, Elena. You have to cut it out. It's ugly, it's expensive, and it makes a mess. But it's the only way the thing stands. I stared at the beam. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to cry. It was just a piece of wood. It was just a construction site. But standing there, surrounded by dust and noise, I felt more exposed than I had in years. So what do we do? I asked quietly. We strip it back, Julian said, his voice softer now. He was watching me closely, and for a second, I wondered if he could see the cracks in my own foundation. We reinforce it with steel. We leave the scars visible so we know where the weak points are. Then we light it from below, not inside. Honesty, I murmured. Structural honesty, he corrected. The only kind that matters. He handed me a hard hat. Put this on. You're making me nervous standing there without gear. I took the yellow hat. It was scuffed and scratched. Thank you. We spent the next hour walking the site. Julian was professional but blunt. He didn't defer to me. He argued with me about materials, about spacing, about the flow of movement. He was passionate about the bones of the building, about preserving its history while making it livable. It was exhausting, and yet it was exhilarating. For an hour, I didn't think about the text message. I didn't think about the Le Coucou receipt. I was just dealing with concrete problems. Measurements, load-bearing walls, permits, problems that had solutions. You're good, Julian said as we wrapped up, standing by the freight elevator. He wiped his hands on a rag. Most designers just want to throw velvet on everything and call it a day. You actually understand the space. I like to think form follows function, I said. Rare quality in this city, he replied. He looked at me, really looked at me. You look tired, though. Not the I need a vacation tired, the I need to scream tired. My breath hitched. He was too observant. It was dangerous. It's a busy season, I said, pressing the elevator button a little too hard. Mark, my husband, is in the middle of a big merger. It affects everything. Ah, the husband. Julian nodded, his face unreadable. Well, go home, get some rest. The building will still be here tomorrow. It's been here 100 years. It's not going anywhere. Goodbye, Julian, I said as the doors opened. See you, Elena. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors slide shut, cutting off the view of the dusty, chaotic loft and the man standing in the center of it. I checked my phone. 4 p.m., no text from Mark. I went back to the office, but I couldn't focus. I left early, walking 40 blocks uptown just to burn off the nervous energy. When I got home, the apartment was pristine. The housekeeper had come, the pillows were plumped, the flowers were fresh. It was perfect. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. I looked at Mark's suits, lined up by color. I reached out and touched the sleeve of his gray wool blazer. I smelled it. Underneath the dry cleaning chemicals and his cologne, there was something else, Faint. Barely there. Vanilla and smoke. It wasn't my perfume. I let go of the sleeve as if it had burned me. The rot wasn't just in the ceiling on Green Street. It was here. It was in the weave of the fabric, in the silence of the hallway, in the bed we shared. Julian's voice echoed in my head. You can't just decorate over the rot. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. Okay, I whispered. Strip it back. I walked out to the living room, picked up my laptop, and sat down. I wasn't just going to watch anymore. I was going to map the damage. I pulled up Mark's flight history. He had a trip to Chicago scheduled for next weekend. I opened a new tab. I searched for flights to Chicago on the same dates. I wasn't going to follow him to Chicago. I was going to find out if he was actually going. The silent watcher phase was over. The investigation had begun. Mark was a master of the reasonable explanation. That was the problem. If he had been stumbling home with lipstick on his collar, it would have been easier. I could have screamed. I could have thrown a vase. But Mark didn't stumble. He glided. 3 days after the text message, I found the charge. It wasn't on the Amex. It was on a secondary Visa card he kept for travel expenses, a card I rarely checked because the statements went directly to his office. But I had the login. I had all the logins. The Greenwich Hotel, Tribeca, Bar and Lounge, $120. Tuesday, 5:30 p.m. Tuesday. The same Tuesday, I sat in the car and watched him text Roberts. I waited until dinner to bring it up. We were eating takeout sushi at the kitchen island, a rare, quiet moment between galas. The silence was comfortable, or at least it used to be. Now it felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I was looking at the travel expenses for the tax file, I said, dipping a piece of yellowtail into soy sauce. I didn't look at him. I saw a charge at the Greenwich Hotel on Tuesday. I thought you were at the office until the car picked you up. Mark didn't stop chewing. He swallowed, took a sip of water, and looked at me with an expression of mild confusion. Not guilt, confusion. Tuesday, he frowned, searching his memory. Oh, right. I met a potential recruit there. Young guy from Stanford. I didn't want to bring him to the office yet. Didn't want to spook the other associates. At a hotel bar? I asked. It's quiet there, Elena. You know that. And the kid likes whiskey. He chuckled, shaking his head. Why? Are you auditing me? He said it lightly, a joke, but his eyes were hard. No, I said, my voice tight. It seemed odd. You didn't mention it. I didn't mention it because it was boring, honey. I don't tell you every time I buy a coffee, do I? He reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. You seem stressed lately. You're overanalyzing everything. Is the renovation project getting to you? There it was, the pivot. You seem stressed. You're overanalyzing. Maybe, I said, pulling my hand back. It's a big project. You need to relax, he said, returning to his sushi. Maybe book a spa day this weekend. You're wound tight. I stared at him. He was eating calmly, completely unbothered. For a second, I wondered if I was crazy. Maybe it was just a recruit. Maybe Roberts really did text him. Maybe the vanilla scent on his jacket was from a client. But then I remembered the text. I'm still wearing it. You don't buy a recruit from Stanford drinks at a hotel bar and then receive texts about silk lingerie 3 hours later. The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside the Greenwich Hotel. I told my assistant I was sourcing fabrics in the design district. Instead, I walked 6 blocks south, wearing large sunglasses and a trench coat, feeling ridiculous. I felt like a character in a bad noir film. I walked into the lobby. It was dark, wood-paneled, smelling of burning embers and expensive leather. It was intimate, private, the kind of place you went to be seen by the right people or to hide with the wrong ones. I went to the concierge desk. A young woman with impeccable makeup looked up. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Hi, I said, flashing my most charming smile. My husband was here on Tuesday evening having drinks. He thinks he might have left his scarf. A gray cashmere one? Let me check the lost and found, she said. While she turned away, I scanned the lobby. I didn't know what I was looking for. A ghost? A memory? I walked toward the bar entrance. It was empty at this hour. I imagined Mark sitting in one of the velvet armchairs. Who was sitting across from him? Was she blonde? Brunette? Was she younger than me? Did she laugh at his jokes more genuinely than I did? "I'm sorry, ma'am," the concierge returned. "No gray scarf." "Thank you," I said. "Maybe he left it at the office." I turned to leave, but the air in the lobby felt suddenly thin, insufficient to fill my lungs. I felt a wave of nausea. I was chasing shadows. I was becoming a woman I didn't recognize. Suspicious, skulking, lying to get information. I pushed through the revolving doors and out into the cool afternoon air of Tribeca. I needed coffee. I needed to sit down. I walked aimlessly for a few blocks, my mind replaying the conversation with Mark. "You're wound tight." Was I? Was I destroying my marriage because of a misunderstanding? I turned a corner onto Greenwich Street and nearly collided with a man coming out of a bodega. "Whoa, easy," he said, stepping back. I looked up. It was Julian. He was wearing a similar outfit to the day before, jeans and a t-shirt, but with a flannel shirt thrown over it. He was holding 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier and a bag of bagels. "Elena?" He looked surprised. "You're a long way from the Upper East Side." "Julian," I breathed, seeing a familiar face, one that wasn't part of my social circle, one that didn't know Mark, felt like finding a life raft. I had a meeting nearby." He looked at me, really looked at me. I knew my sunglasses were hiding my eyes, but I felt like he could see the panic radiating off me. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. "Just a long day," I lied. He hesitated, then gestured with his head toward a small park across the street. "I'm taking a break. 5 minutes. You look like you need caffeine more than I do." I should have said no. I should have hailed a cab and gone back to my showroom. But the thought of the silent, perfect apartment was unbearable. "Okay," I said. We sat on a bench in the small, triangular park. The city noise was a constant hum around us. Julian handed me one of the coffees. "Black," he said. "Sorry, no almond milk or whatever you usually drink." "Black is fine," I said, taking a sip. It was bitter and hot, and it grounded me. "So," Julian said, stretching his legs out. His boots were scuffed. "How's the husband? Still merging and acquiring?" I flinched. "He's fine. Busy." "And the renovation? You seemed pretty overwhelmed yesterday." "It's complex," I said. "Old buildings always are." "They have secrets," Julian nodded. "You start peeling back layers and you find things you wish you hadn't. Asbestos, rot, bad wiring." I looked at him sharply. Was he speaking in metaphors again? But his face was open, casual. "How do you deal with it?" I asked. "When you find the rot?" Julian shrugged. "You deal with it. You can't ignore it. If you ignore it, the house falls down eventually. Better to tear it out now, even if it hurts, than to have the roof cave in on you while you're sleeping." I stared at the coffee cup in my hands. Better to tear it out now. What if the house is really beautiful? I asked quietly. What if you've spent 10 years building it, and it's perfect on the outside and everyone admires it? Julian turned to me. He took off his sunglasses. His hazel eyes were serious now. He wasn't talking about architecture anymore. "Elena," he said, his voice was low, "a house that you can't live in safely isn't a home. It's just a set piece. It's a museum." I felt a lump form in my throat. He understood. I didn't know how, but he understood. "I feel like I'm going crazy," I confessed. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I hadn't told anyone. Not my mother, not my best friend. But I told this architect I had met twice. "I feel like I'm looking for cracks that aren't there, but I keep hearing the wood creaking." "Trust your gut," Julian said. "In my line of work, if you think something is wrong, it usually is. Intuition is just data your brain has processed but hasn't articulated yet." He finished his coffee and crumpled the cup. "Look," he said, standing up, "I don't know what's going on. It's none of my business. But you seem like a smart woman who's used to being in control. Losing that control scares you." "Terrifies me," I corrected. "Then take it back," he said. "Don't wait for the roof to fall. Go check the beams." He looked at his watch. "I have to get back to the guys. If I leave them alone too long, They start trying to fix things with duct tape. He smiled, and it was a genuine, warm smile. It transformed his face. For a moment, he didn't look rough or critical. He looked safe. "Thanks for the coffee, Julian," I said. "Anytime, Mrs. Vance." I watched him walk away, back toward the construction site on Green Street. He walked with a loose, easy stride, a man comfortable in his own skin, a man who dealt with messy, broken things every day and wasn't afraid of them. I sat on the bench for another 10 minutes. The coffee had turned cold. "Take it back." I pulled out my phone. I didn't go home. I opened the browser and searched for Private Investigators Manhattan. It felt dirty. It felt like a betrayal. But Julian was right. I was living in a museum, and I was terrified the exhibits were fake. I scrolled past the first few ads and found a discreet agency in Midtown. I called the number. "Dalton Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "I need to have someone followed," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. "Who?" "My husband," I said. "Mark Vance." "When do you want to start?" "Immediately," I said. "He says he's going to Chicago next weekend. I want to know if he gets on that plane. We require a retainer. I'll wire it today." I hung up. I looked at the skyline, the glass towers gleaming in the sun. The paranoia was still there, buzzing under my skin, but the paralysis was gone. I had made a move. I had swung the hammer. I stood up and hailed a cab. As I rode back uptown, back to the world of doormen in velvet and silence, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer just the victim waiting for the blow. I was the architect of my own demolition. And if the house was going to come down, I was going to be the one to push the button. But as I looked out the window, it wasn't Mark's face I saw in my mind. It was Julian's, saying, "It's just a set piece." And for the first time in a long time, I wondered what it would feel like to live in something real. Over the next week, the construction site on Green Street became my sanctuary. This was ironic, considering it was a hazard zone of exposed wiring, crumbling brick, and constant noise. But it was honest noise. The sound of a sledgehammer hitting a wall didn't lie. It didn't have subtext. It was just force meeting resistance. I found myself inventing reasons to visit. I needed to check the tile samples. I needed to verify the light angles. I needed to ensure the crown molding wasn't too ornate. My assistant, Sarah, looked confused when I canceled a lunch with a Vogue editor to go inspect the subflooring, but she didn't question me. Tuesday morning, I found Julian on the third floor, kneeling on the floorboards, examining a section of intricate parquet wood that had been uncovered under layers of cheap linoleum. "Look at this," he said without looking up, knowing it was me by the sound of my heels on the raw wood. Herringbone pattern, white oak, probably installed around 1910. Someone covered this with beige vinyl in the 80s. It's a crime against humanity. I walked over and crouched down beside him, ignoring the dust settling on my skirt. I traced the pattern of the wood with my fingertip. It was dull and scratched, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. "Can we save it?" I asked. "It'll take time," Julian said, finally looking at me. His eyes were clear, focused. "We have to sand it down by hand, inch by inch. If we use a machine, we'll destroy the grain. It requires patience. Most people would just rip it up and put down new wood that looks old. But it wouldn't be the same." "No," I whispered. "It wouldn't have the history." "Exactly," he said. He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag. "People are too quick to replace things when they lose their shine. They don't understand that the value isn't in the newness. It's in the endurance." The air between us shifted. It was heavy, charged with a current that had nothing to do with architecture. I knew we weren't talking about floors. "Is it worth it?" I asked, meeting his gaze. "The effort? Sometimes things are just too broken to be fixed." Julian held my gaze for a beat too long. "Everything can be restored, Elena, but you have to be willing to see the damage for what it is. You can't fix what you refuse to look at." I looked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. He saw me. In a city of 8 million people, in a marriage where I shared a bed with a man every night, this stranger in work boots was the only one who actually saw me. "I have to go," I said abruptly, standing up. "I have a dinner tonight. It's our anniversary." Julian stood up slowly. His expression darkened slightly. a flicker of something possessive that sent a thrill of fear and excitement down my spine. "Happy anniversary," he said flatly. "How many years?" 10, I said. "A decade," he mused. Tin. That's the traditional gift. Tin or aluminum. Durability. Flexibility. "I doubt Mark knows that," I said with a dry laugh. "He deals in gold and futures, not tradition." "Have a good night, Elena," Julian said, turning back to the floor. "Don't let him cover the oak with vinyl." I left the site feeling breathless, as if I had just run a marathon. The dinner was at Per Se. Of course it was. It was the hardest reservation in the city, the kind of place you went to make a statement, not to have a conversation. Mark had his assistant book it 3 months ago. I wore a midnight blue silk dress that Mark had bought me for a charity auction last year. I did my hair. I put on the diamond earrings he gave me for my 30th birthday. I looked the part. Mrs. Mark Vance. Mark was 20 minutes late. I sat at the table overlooking Central Park, sipping a glass of champagne that cost more than my first car. The waiter was hovering, apologetic. "Mr. Vance just called," the maitre whispered. "He is stuck in traffic coming from the office. He sends his deepest apologies." "It's fine," I said, smiling the gala smile. "I'll wait." When Mark finally arrived, he was a whirlwind of energy. He kissed me on the cheek, sat down, and immediately placed his phone on the table, face down. "I am so sorry, babe," he said, signaling the waiter for a scotch. "The merger is in the final stages. It's madness. But I'm here now. Happy anniversary." "Happy anniversary," I said. The meal was a blur of 9 courses, each more exquisite and tiny than the last. We talked about his work. We talked about the summer house rental. We talked about everything except the fact that I had hired a private investigator to follow him, or the fact that he was checking his watch every 15 minutes. I watched him eat. I watched the way he cut his Wagyu beef. I watched the way he charmed the sommelier. It was a performance. I was watching an actor play the role of devoted husband. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said as the dessert arrived, a chocolate sphere that melted when warm sauce was poured over it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Not a small ring box, a long, flat necklace box. "Mark, you didn't have to," I said, my stomach tightening. "Open it," he urged, his eyes gleaming with pride. "I picked it out myself." I opened the box. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It was massive, a thick chain of platinum encrusted with diamonds, leading down to a pendant the size of a quail egg. It was stunning. It was expensive. It was undoubtedly worth 6 figures, and it was hideous. It was flashy, ostentatious, and cold. It was something a rapper's girlfriend would wear, or a dowager countess. It wasn't me. I like delicate, understated gold. I like vintage pieces. I like things with soul. This necklace screamed, "Look how much money I have." "It's wow," I said. I couldn't bring myself to say it was beautiful. "It's the Empress collection," Mark beamed. "The sales associate said it's the most exclusive piece they have this season. Put it on." I felt a wave of revulsion. He hadn't picked it out because it reminded him of me. He had picked it out because the sales associate told him it was the most expensive. He was buying my silence with diamonds. He was covering the rot with expensive vinyl. I turned around and he clasped the cold metal around my neck. It felt heavy, like a collar. "Gorgeous," he whispered against my ear. "You look like $1,000,000. "Thank you, Mark," I said. "I have to take this," he said suddenly, pulling back as his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. "It's the London team. I'm so sorry, Elle. I have to step out for 5 minutes." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the phone and walked briskly toward the lobby. I sat there, touching the cold diamonds at my throat. I looked around the restaurant. Couples were holding hands, whispering. I was alone with a half-eaten chocolate sphere and a necklace that felt like a shackle. I thought about Julian. I thought about him kneeling on the dusty floor, talking about sanding wood by hand. It requires patience. The value isn't in the newness. Mark didn't have patience. He just acquired things. And when they broke, he replaced them or bought something shinier to distract from the cracks. I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling. I wasn't going to text Mark. I opened a new message. I typed in Julian's number, which I had memorized from the project contact sheet. "It's vinyl." I stared at the 2 words. It was dangerous. It was crossing a line. Sending a text to another man on my anniversary dinner while my husband was in the lobby, it was the beginning of the end. But I felt so lonely I thought I might die right there in the chair. I hit send. I put the phone down, my heart racing. I expected no reply. It was 9:30 p.m. He was probably asleep or out with friends or doing whatever men like Julian did. 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed. Then rip it up. 3 words. No judgment, no confusion. He knew exactly what I meant. He knew I wasn't talking about the floor. Mark returned to the table, looking flushed and triumphant. "Crisis averted," he announced, sitting down and downing the rest of his scotch. "London is on board. We're going to close this thing." He looked at me, his eyes sliding over my face and settling on the diamonds. "God, that necklace looks good on you," he said. "I knew it was the right choice." "It's very generous, Mark," I said. "You deserve the best, Elena. You're the perfect wife." He signaled for the check. As we walked out of the restaurant, his hand on the small of my back, I felt a profound shift in the universe. The man holding me was a stranger. The man I had just texted was the only one who spoke my language. We got into the car. Mark started scrolling through emails again. I looked out the window at the blurred city lights. I touched the necklace again. I would wear it tonight. I would let him parade me around. But inside, I had already started sanding down the floorboards. The emotional betrayal had happened. It wasn't sex. It was worse. I had given Julian the truth, and I had left Mark with the lie. The phone in my clutch buzzed again. I didn't check it. I didn't have to. I knew who it was, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel cold. I felt a terrifying burning heat. The restoration had begun. Friday arrived with the gray, oppressive weight of a coming storm. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple, hanging low over the skyscrapers. Inside the penthouse, the air was conditioned to a perfect 68 degrees, but I felt like I was suffocating. Mark was packing. He was meticulous about it, folding his shirts with the precision of a surgeon. I sat on the edge of the bed watching him. I was playing the role of the dutiful wife one last time, but the script felt different now. Before, I was a participant. Now, I was an audience member watching a bad play. "The forecast in Chicago is terrible," he said, zipping up his garment bag. "Windy, rain. I might be stuck at O'Hare on Sunday coming back." "That's unfortunate," I said, my voice flat. "Make sure you take your trench coat. Way ahead of you." He checked his watch. "Car's downstairs. I should go. I don't want to hit traffic to JFK." He walked over to me. He looked handsome in his traveling clothes, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, the leather jacket I had bought him 3 years ago. He leaned down and kissed me. It was a peck, dry and perfunctory. "I'll call you when I land," he said. "Safe travels, Mark." I watched him walk out the door. I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. I heard the elevator ding. And then I was alone. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I stared at the spot where he had stood. "I'll call you when I land." It was such an easy lie. It rolled off his tongue like a reflex. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't Mark. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was Dalton, the private investigator. I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly. "Hello? Mrs. Vance?" Dalton's voice was gravelly and devoid of emotion. "He didn't go to JFK." I closed my eyes. Hearing it out loud was different than suspecting it. It made it real. It made it a fact in the universe, as solid as the floor beneath my feet. "Where did he go?" I asked. "The car took him to the West Village, Perry Street. He entered a brownstone at 4:15 p.m. He has a key. He hasn't come out." Perry Street. It was a beautiful, tree-lined street, romantic, quiet, the kind of place where you lived if you were an artist or a writer or a millionaire hiding a mistress. "Do you know who lives there?" "We're running the deed now," Dalton said. "It's held by an LLC, Apex Holdings. Does that sound familiar?" "No," I said. "Keep watching." "We'll have eyes on the door all weekend, Mrs. Vance. Do you want photos?" "Yes," I whispered. "I want everything." I hung up. The silence of the apartment roared in my ears. He was 20 minutes away. He was unpacking that garment bag in another woman's bedroom. He was probably pouring a drink, laughing about how gullible I was. I'll call you when I land. I couldn't stay here. The walls of the penthouse felt like they were closing in. Every object in the room, the wedding photo on the dresser, the expensive linens, the art on the walls, mocked me. It was a stage set for a play that had been canceled. I grabbed my phone. I didn't think. I just reacted. I needed to be near something real. I needed to be near someone who saw the rot and didn't look away. I texted Julian. He's gone. Chicago. It was cryptic, but I knew he would understand. The response came 2 minutes later. Dinner. 8 p.m. The Spotted Pig. It's loud, it's crowded, and the food is honest. Meet me there. I should have said no. I was a married woman. My husband was technically on a business trip, but the moral high ground had crumbled beneath my feet the moment Dalton said Perry Street. I dressed differently than I usually did for dinner. No silk, no diamonds. I wore black jeans, boots, and a leather jacket. I let my hair down, messy and loose. I looked in the mirror. I looked younger. I looked dangerous. The Spotted Pig was chaotic in the best way possible. It smelled of roasting meat, beer, and old wood. It was loud. People were laughing, shouting, living. It was the antithesis of per se. I saw Julian immediately. He was sitting at a small corner table, nursing a beer. He was wearing a dark button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes widened slightly. "You look different," he said as I sat down. "I feel different," I replied. "I feel like I just woke up from a coma." "Wine?" he asked. "Whiskey," I said. "Neat." He signaled the waiter. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me with that intense, analyzing gaze like he was calculating the structural load I was carrying. "So," he said once the drinks arrived. "Chicago." "He never got on the plane," I said. I didn't whisper it. I said it clearly, cutting through the noise of the restaurant. "He's in the West Village, Perry Street." Julian took a sip of his beer. He didn't look shocked. He looked resigned. "I'm sorry, Elena." "Don't be," I said, taking a burn of the whiskey. "I'd rather know. It's the not knowing that kills you. It's the gaslighting. Being told the sky is green when you know it's blue." "The demolition phase," Julian murmured. "It's the messiest part. Dust everywhere. You can't see 5 feet in front of you." "I'm scared," I admitted. It was the first time I had said it out loud. "I've built my whole life around this structure. If I tear it down, what's left? I'm 32 years old, Julian. I don't know who I am without Mark." Julian reached across the table. He didn't take my hand, but he rested his fingers near mine on the scarred wood of the table. The proximity was electric. "You're Elena," he said fiercely. "The woman who spotted the load-bearing issue in the hallway within 5 minutes. The woman who cares about the history of a floorboard. You are not defined by who you married. You're defined by what you build next." I looked at his hand. His fingers were long, calloused from work. They were capable hands, hands that fix things. "Why are you here, Julian?" I asked softly. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. I'm just a client." "You know I'm not here because you're a client," he said. His voice dropped, intimate and low. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. "I'm here because, from the moment I saw you tripping over that tarp, I saw someone who was drowning in open air, and I wanted to pull you out." My breath hitched. That's a dangerous thing to say to a married woman. "The marriage is a technicality at this point, Elena," he said. "Let's not lie to each other. We're past that. Mark broke the contract. You're a free agent, whether the paperwork says so or not." "I'm not free," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm shattered." "Then let me help you pick up the pieces," he said. He moved his hand, covering mine. His skin was warm, rough against my manicured fingers. The contact sent a shockwave through me that was purely physical. It wasn't just comfort. It was desire. It was a raw, hungry need to be touched by someone who wasn't lying to me. I didn't pull away. I turned my hand over and interlaced my fingers with his. We sat there for a long moment, staring at each other. The air between us was thick, heavy with the things we weren't saying. "I want you. I see you. I hate him." "Let's get out of here," Julian said abruptly. He threw cash on the table. We walked out into the cool night air. The rain had started. a light mist that made the streetlights glow with halos. We walked without a destination, just moving through the tangled streets of the village. We walked in silence, but our arms brushed against each other. Every touch was a promise. We stopped at the corner of Bleecker Street. Julian turned to me. The rain was dampening his hair. He looked wild and beautiful. "Elena," he said. He stepped closer. I could smell the wood smoke and soap on him. "Julian, I can't," I started, but I didn't know what I couldn't do. I couldn't go home. I couldn't do this. "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said. "I just want you to know that you're not invisible. You're the most real thing I've seen in years." He reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from my face. His thumb lingered on my cheekbone. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. I felt a tear slip out. "I don't want to go back there," and I whispered. "I don't want to go back to the museum." "Then don't," he said. "Come with me, just for tonight. No expectations. Just somewhere safe." It was the red line. If I said yes, I was crossing over. I was becoming the thing I hated, a cheater, a liar. But as I stood there, shivering in the rain, feeling the warmth of Julian's hand on my face, I realized that the line had already been crossed. Mark had erased the line when he went to Perry Street. I opened my eyes and looked at Julian. I saw kindness. I saw desire. I saw a man who would never buy me a necklace just to shut me up. "Okay," I said. The word was barely a sound. "Okay," he repeated. He hailed a cab. He opened the door for me. As I slid into the back seat, I looked back at the street. I was leaving Elena Vance, the perfect wife, standing on the corner in the rain. The woman in the cab was someone else entirely. Someone broken, terrified, and for the first time in a decade, completely awake. Julian slid in beside me. He didn't touch me. He gave the driver an address in Brooklyn. I watched the city blur past the window. I felt a sick, twisting knot of guilt in my stomach. But underneath it, burning bright and hot, was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was 22. I felt alive. I woke up to the smell of sawdust and strong coffee. For a terrifying second, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was high and made of stamped tin, peeling in the corners. The light coming through the window was gray and unfiltered. I wasn't in my king-size bed with the Egyptian cotton sheets. I was on a leather sofa, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, in a loft in Brooklyn. Julian was in the kitchen area, an open space separated from the living area by a butcher block island. He was leaning against the counter, watching me. He was wearing the same clothes as the night before. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I croaked. My voice was thick with sleep and the residual whiskey. We hadn't slept together. Not in the way that would shatter my marriage vows in a court of law. We had gone to his apartment, drunk more wine, and talked until 3 in the morning. We talked about everything except Mark. We talked about architecture, about my childhood in Connecticut, about his time restoring villas in Italy. It was an emotional intimacy that felt far more dangerous than sex. I had fallen asleep on his couch, exhausted, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. I sat up, checking my phone. 7:15 a.m. Panic surged through me like an electric shock. "I have to go," I said, throwing off the blanket. "If Mark calls—" "He thinks you're asleep," Julian said calmly. "And he's in Chicago, right?" "Right," I said, standing up and smoothing my wrinkled clothes. My head throbbed. "But I can't be here. This is too much reality for one morning." Julian walked over. He didn't try to stop me. He handed me a cup of coffee and a travel mug. "Take this," he said. "You look like you're going into battle." I looked at him. His eyes were soft, concerned. I wanted to stay. I wanted to hide in this dusty, honest apartment forever. But I was Mrs. Mark Vance. I had a role to play. "Thank you, Julian," I said, "for the sanctuary." "The door code is 1984, he said, "in case you need to escape again." I took an Uber back to Manhattan. The ride was a blur of anxiety. I formulated my alibi. If Mark called, I had gone for an early morning walk in Central Park. I had gone to the flower market. I practiced the lies in my head, tasting the bitterness of them. I was becoming him. I entered the penthouse at 8:30 a.m. The apartment was silent. The morning light hit the marble floors, creating long, sharp shadows. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He wasn't back yet. I had time to shower, to wash the smell of Brooklyn and wood smoke off my skin, to become Elena again. I walked into the master bedroom and froze. A suitcase was open on the bed. Mark's suitcase. The bathroom door opened and Mark walked out. He was wearing a towel, steam billowing out behind him. He looked fresh, rested, and utterly at home. "Elena?" he said, looking surprised. "Where were you? I looked for you when I got in." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard. I thought he must hear it. I forced my face into a mask of pleasant surprise. "Mark, you're back?" I asked, my voice pitching slightly higher than usual. I went for a walk. I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt empty." He smiled. It was that dazzling, boyish smile that had charmed investors and juries for a decade. He walked over and hugged me. He smelled of his expensive peppermint soap. The familiar scent made me nauseous. "I caught the red eye," he said, pulling back to look at me. "The meetings in Chicago went faster than expected. We closed the deal over dinner last night, and I just wanted to be home. I didn't want to spend the weekend in a hotel room without you." He kissed my forehead. "I missed you, El." I stared at him. He was so convincing. His eyes were clear. His voice was warm. There was no trace of deception. If I hadn't hired Dalton, if I hadn't seen the text, I would have believed him. I wanted to believe him. A treacherous part of my brain whispered, maybe Dalton was wrong. Maybe the GPS tracker malfunctioned. Maybe he really did go to Chicago. It was so much easier to believe the lie. If I believed the lie, I could take a shower, put on my robe, and have breakfast with my husband. I wouldn't have to tear down the house. I wouldn't have to be alone. "I missed you too," I lied. It was the heaviest lie I had ever told. "You look tired," he said, brushing a stray hair from my face. "Why don't you go freshen up? I picked up some bagels on the way in." "Essa bagel, your favorite." "Okay," I said. "I'll be right out." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower to drown out the silence. I stripped off my clothes, shaking. He bought bagels. He came home early. He said he missed me. I stood under the scalding water, scrubbing my skin until it was red. I wanted to wash away the doubt. I wanted to wash away Julian. I wanted to go back to before. When I came out, dressed in a silk lounge set, Mark was in the kitchen plating the bagels. He had made coffee. He was reading the Wall Street Journal. It was a perfect domestic tableau. "So," I said, sitting down, "how was Chicago? Was the weather as bad as they said?" Mark didn't look up from the paper immediately. "Terrible. Pouring rain the whole time. The wind off the lake was brutal. We barely left the conference room." "And the hotel?" I asked, buttering my bagel with trembling hands. "Was the Palmer House okay?" "A bit dated," he said, finally looking at me with a grin. "The heating clanked all night. I hardly slept. That's why I look like a zombie." He didn't look like a zombie. He looked vibrant. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's fine. It was worth it. The deal is done." He reached for his coffee. "Oh, before I forget, I have a receipt in my jacket pocket for the car service. Can you file it for me later?" "Sure," I said. He finished his breakfast, kissed me again, and went into the study to make some calls. I sat there looking at the empty plate. He was so casual, so confident. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. His suit jacket, the one he had worn on the plane, was draped over the valet stand. I reached into the inside pocket. I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt, but not for a car service. It was a thermal receipt, the ink slightly faded. The Nighthawk Cinema, Brooklyn. 2 tickets, 9:45 p.m., Friday night, last night, when he was supposed to be in a conference room in Chicago battling the wind and rain. He had been in Brooklyn, at a movie theater, watching a film, and the bottom of the receipt had a timestamp, 11:30 p.m. I stared at the paper. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't just cheated. He had gone on a date, a movie date. The kind of mundane, intimate date you go on when you're courting someone, when you're in love. He wasn't in Chicago. He wasn't suffering in a hotel room. He was eating popcorn in Williamsburg while I was sitting in the Spotted Pig crying into a whiskey. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I shoved the receipt into my pocket as I heard Mark's footsteps approaching. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I was thinking we should go to that gallery opening at the Met tonight, the one the board members are attending. Show the flag." "The Met," I repeated. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from a different room. "Yeah, it starts at 6. You have that black dress, the Givenchy? You look stunning in it." "Okay," I said. "The Met." 5 hours later. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was crowded. The acoustics magnified the chatter of the city's elite into a dull roar. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes. I was wearing the black dress. I was wearing the gala smile. Mark was holding court near the Temple of Dender, laughing with a group of investors. His hand was resting possessively on my lower back. His fingers felt like brands burning through the fabric. "Elena, you look magnificent," a woman named Clarissa chirped. She was the wife of a hedge fund manager. "Mark was just telling us about his nightmare trip to Chicago. Flying in this weather? Brave man." "Yes," I said. The room started to spin. "Very brave." "He said the turbulence was awful," Clarissa continued, leaning in. "I hate flying. I would have taken a sedative." He handled it well," I stammered. The air in the museum was suddenly too hot. The smell of expensive perfume and stale champagne was suffocating. I looked at Mark. He was nodding solemnly, adding details to the lie. The pilot came over the intercom. We dropped 1,000 feet. He was building a cathedral of lies, brick by brick, right in front of me, and everyone was worshiping at the altar. My vision blurred at the edges. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. Nighthawk Cinema. 2 tickets. "Elena, are you okay?" Clarissa's voice sounded distorted, slow. I tried to take a breath, but my lungs wouldn't expand. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a steel beam. I gasped. Mark turned, his smile fading into a frown of annoyance disguised as concern. "Elle, what's wrong?" "I can't," I whispered. The room tilted violently. The stone temple seemed to loom over me, ready to crush us all. "I need air," I said, louder this time. "Elena, calm down," Mark hissed, gripping my arm tighter. "People are watching." "Let go of me," I said. "Elena," I said, "let go." I pulled my arm away with a violent jerk. The movement knocked a tray of champagne flutes from a passing waiter's hand. Crash. The sound of shattering glass silenced the group. 50 pairs of eyes turned to look at us. I stood there, gasping for air, the shattered glass glittering around my feet like diamonds. Like the fake, sharp, broken things my life was made. "I have to go," I choked out. I turned and ran. I ran past the Egyptian statues, past the security guards, past the shocked faces of high society. I ran out the heavy brass doors and onto Fifth Avenue. I didn't stop until I reached the sidewalk. I leaned against a stone wall, hyperventilating, clutching the receipt in my pocket like a lifeline. The facade hadn't just cracked, it had exploded. I didn't go home. Going home meant walking back into the set of a play that had already finished, where the lights were off and the audience had left. But the actors were still forced to recite their lines in the dark. I couldn't do it. After fleeing the Met, I walked for 20 blocks. The adrenaline that had propelled me out of the museum began to fade, replaced by a cold, seeping numbness. My heels clicked rhythmically against the concrete, a lonely sound in the city noise. I caught my reflection in a darkened shop window on Madison Avenue. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her hair was windblown, escaping the severe pins that had held it in place. The Givenchy dress, worth more than most people's cars, was splattered with mud at the hem from a puddle I hadn't seen. My mascara was smeared. I looked like a disaster. And for the first time in my life, I liked it. That perfect, poised woman in the reflection, the one Mark had married, the one he had paraded around like a trophy, was dead. She had died the moment I pulled that receipt out of his jacket pocket. The woman standing on the sidewalk was something else. She was angry. She was raw. And she was done being a spectator in her own humiliation. I hailed a cab. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance in the rearview mirror. I didn't give my Tribeca address. I gave an address in Brooklyn. "That's a bit of a trek," he grunted. "Just drive," I said, leaning my head against the cool glass. As we crossed the bridge, seeing the Manhattan Skyline recede, I felt a twisted sense of logic taking hold. Mark had his secret world on Perry Street. He had his movies, his popcorn, his intimacy with someone else. He had broken the contract. And in business, when one party breaches the contract, the other party is released from their obligations. This wasn't just about sadness anymore. It was about equity. It was about balancing the ledger. It was a terrible, destructive thought, but it was the only thing keeping me upright. When I arrived at Julian's building, it was nearly midnight. The street was quiet, lined with old industrial buildings converted into lofts. I stood in front of the rusted intercom panel. My finger hovered over the button. If I pressed it, there was no going back. If I pressed it, I became the thing I judged. I pressed it. "Yeah?" Julian's voice came through the speaker, tinny and distorted. "It's me," I said. There was a long pause. For a heartbeat, I thought he might tell me to go. Away. To go home to my husband. The buzzer sounded, a harsh, buzzing drone that unlocked the heavy metal door. I took the stairs. The elevator was too slow. I needed the physical exertion. By the time I reached his floor, I was breathless, my lungs burning. Julian was standing in his doorway. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt that had a stain of paint on the shoulder. He looked tired, his hair messy, his feet bare. He looked at me, at the ruined dress, the wild hair, the fierce, desperate look in my eyes. "Elena," he said softly. He didn't move to hug me. He stood his ground, wary. "What happened?" "I couldn't go home," I said. I walked past him, into the apartment. It was exactly as I remembered, but at night the shadows made it feel even more chaotic. There were blueprints spread across the dining table, weighted down by coffee mugs and a hammer. There was a pile of laundry on a chair. The sink was full of dishes. The air smelled of turpentine and stale takeout. It was messy, it was gross, it was real. It was the complete opposite of my white, sterile, silent prison. "Did he hurt you?" Julian asked, closing the door and locking it. The sound of the lock clicking fell heavy in the room. "No," I said, turning to face him. "He didn't hit me, if that's what you mean. He just erased me. He stood there and lied to my face in front of 50 people, and he didn't even blink." I began to pace. The energy inside me was frantic, jagged. "I found a receipt," I spat out. "He wasn't in Chicago. He was in Williamsburg, watching a movie. He's dating her, Julian. He's not just sleeping with her. He's dating her." Julian leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. He watched me with a dark intensity. "And that hurts more." "It makes me feel like a fool," I said. "It makes me feel like I've been living with a stranger." I stopped pacing and looked at him. He was the only solid thing in a world that had turned into liquid. He was looking at me not with pity, but with a kind of recognition. He knew what it felt like to be broken. "Why did you come here, Elena?" he asked. His voice was low, devoid of the playfulness he usually had. "Because I didn't want to be alone," I said. "And because I wanted to be somewhere dirty." He flinched slightly at the word. "I don't mean the apartment," I clarified, stepping closer to him. "I mean, I'm tired of being clean. I'm tired of being perfect. I'm tired of being the good wife who smiles and nods while her husband lives a double life." I reached up and unclasped the diamond earrings Mark had given me. I dropped them onto the table. They made a sharp clink as they hit the wood, landing next to a rusty screwdriver. "I want to burn it down," I whispered. "Elena," Julian warned, "don't do this because you're angry at him. You'll regret it." "I am angry," I said, closing the distance between us. I could feel the heat coming off his body. "But that's not the only reason." I looked up into his hazel eyes. I saw the desire there, warring with his better judgment. I saw the way his gaze dropped to my mouth. "You said you wanted to pull me out," I said, my voice trembling. "So pull me out." I didn't wait for him to answer. I grabbed the front of his t-shirt and pulled him down to me. The kiss wasn't gentle. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a collision. It was teeth and desperation, and a month of repressed rage and attraction exploding all at once. I kissed him like I was trying to breathe, like I was trying to prove I existed. For a second, Julian stood rigid. Then a groan ripped from his throat, and he kissed me back. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling my head back, his grip almost painful. There was no romance in it. There were no candles, no soft music. We stumbled backward, knocking a stack of books off the table. He lifted me up and I wrapped my legs around his waist, burying my face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him, sweat and paint and man. He carried me to the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and gray. He didn't lay me down gently. He let me fall onto the mattress, following me down with a hunger that matched my own. We didn't speak. There were no I love yous, no promises. It was a frantic, physical exorcism. I needed to feel something other than the cold numbness of betrayal. I needed to feel skin, weight, friction. I needed to feel possessed by someone who actually looked at me. When his hands touched my skin, replacing the memory of Mark's proprietary grip, I didn't close my eyes. I kept them open, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, anchoring myself in the imperfection of the moment. I wasn't making love. I was making war on my own history. Afterward, the silence was deafening. We lay side by side in the dim light of the street lamps, filtering through the blinds. The room was cold. The sweat on my skin turned clammy. The rush of adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a crater of exhaustion and a new, heavy weight in my chest. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me. My Givenchy dress lay in a heap on the floor, looking like a dead bird. Julian was staring at the ceiling, one arm thrown over his eyes. "Well," he said. His voice was rough. "That happened." "Yes," I said. He turned his head to look at me. The softness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a guarded cynicism. "Did it work?" "Did what work? Did it make you forget him? Or did it just make you feel like you got even?" The question hung in the air, sharp and accusing. I looked down at my hands. "It's not that simple." "It never is." Julian sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He sat with his back to me, the muscles of his shoulders tense. "Look, Elena, I've wanted you since the minute I saw you at the site. You know that. But I'm not a revenge tool. I'm not a jagged rock you pick up to throw through your husband's window." The shame washed over me then, hot and stinging. He was right. I had used him. I had used his body, his home, his kindness to soothe my own ego. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I didn't mean to." "You did," he said, standing up and pulling on his boxers. He walked to the window and looked out. "But I let you, so I guess we're both guilty." He turned back to me. "You can stay, it's late, but don't expect breakfast in bed. This isn't a rom-com." "I should go," I said. I felt small. I felt dirty in a way that had nothing to do with sex. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Back to the penthouse?" "No," I said, standing up and reaching for my dress. My hands were shaking as I tried to zip it up. The zipper caught. "I'll go to a hotel." Julian watched me struggle with the zipper for a moment, then sighed. He walked over and brushed my hands away. "Let me," he said. He zipped up the dress. His fingers lingered on my spine for a second longer than necessary. The touch burned. "Elena," he said, his voice softer now, "you're going to have to face him eventually. You can't just run around the city changing costumes." "I know," I said, turning to face him, "but not tonight. Tonight, I just need to sleep without wondering who he's texting." "Take the couch," he said. "The bed is complicated now." I nodded. "Thank you, Julian." I walked out to the living room. I lay down on the leather sofa, pulling the wool blanket up to my chin. I could hear Julian in the bedroom, moving around, then silence. I stared at the tin ceiling. I had crossed the line. I had burned the bridge. I was an adulteress. And as I closed my eyes, the terrifying truth settled in. I didn't feel guilty about the act itself. I felt guilty that for those 30 minutes in the dark, I hadn't thought about Mark at all. I had only thought about myself, and I liked it. I returned to the penthouse at 10 in the morning on Sunday. I was wearing the same black dress, but I had bought a cheap trench coat from a street vendor to cover it. I felt like a spy returning from behind enemy lines, exhausted, compromised, and carrying secrets that could detonate my entire life. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could feel Mark's presence the moment I stepped out of the elevator. The air pressure felt different. He was sitting at the dining table, a laptop open, a half-eaten croissant on a plate. He didn't look up when the door clicked shut. "You're back," he said. His voice was calm, but it had a razor-sharp edge to it. "I am," I said, walking toward the bedroom. "I needed time, Mark. After last night, the panic attack." "The panic attack," he repeated, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, scanning me from head to toe. He looked at the cheap coat, the messy hair, the smudged makeup. "You disappeared for 12 hours, Elena. You didn't answer. Your phone. You didn't come home." "I stayed at a hotel," I lied. The lie came easier this time. "I couldn't breathe in here." "Which hotel?" "The Carlyle," I said. It was the first name that popped into my head. Mark stared at me. He tapped a pen against the table. Tap, tap, tap. "That's funny. I called the Carlyle. They didn't have a reservation under your name." My blood ran cold. I hadn't expected him to check. I had underestimated his paranoia. "I booked under my maiden name," I said quickly. "I just wanted to be anonymous." "Right," he said, standing up. He walked around the table, approaching me slowly. "You know, you've been acting strange for weeks. Distant, secretive, hiding your phone. And now you run out of a gala and vanish all night?" He stopped a foot away from me. He smelled of coffee and expensive aftershave. "Are you seeing someone, Elena?" The question hung in the air, a massive, grotesque joke. I almost laughed. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was standing there, the man with the Perry Street apartment, the man with the pregnant mistress, asking me if I was cheating. "Am I seeing someone?" I repeated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think," Mark said, crossing his arms. "You're not yourself. You're cold. You're checking up on me. And look at you. You look like you've been—" He gestured vaguely at my appearance. "You look guilty." "I look exhausted," I snapped. "I look like a woman who is tired of the lies." "What lies?" he challenged. "The lies we tell ourselves," I shouted, pivoting to avoid the direct accusation. I wasn't ready to play my ace yet. "That we're happy, that this—" I gestured around the sterile $1 million room. "That this is enough." Mark looked taken aback by the outburst. He wasn't used to me yelling. He was used to Elena the peacemaker, Elena the diplomat. "You're hysterical," he said, dismissively. "Go take a shower. You smell like—" He sniffed the air, frowning. "You smell like solvents, like paint." My heart skipped a beat. Julian's apartment. "I walked past a construction site," I said, pushing past him. "I'm going to shower. Don't disturb me." I locked myself in the bathroom and leaned against the door, shaking. He was suspicious. He was projecting his own guilt onto me, which meant he was on high alert. If I was going to find the proof I needed, the proof of where the money for Perry Street came from, I had to move fast. The rest of the day was a cold war. We moved around the apartment like ghosts, avoiding eye contact. Mark spent the afternoon in his study with the door closed. I could hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. At 6 o'clock, he emerged. "We're ordering in," he stated. "Thai food. I have to work tonight. I need the study." "Fine," I said. While we waited for the food, Mark went to take a shower. He left, his study door slightly ajar. It was a trap. It had to be. But desperation makes you reckless. I slipped into the study. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the screensaver on his desktop. I didn't go for the computer. He would have changed the password. I went for the shredder. Mark was meticulous about shredding documents, but sometimes when he was in a rush, he just threw things in the wastebasket next to the shredder, intending to shred them later. I knelt by the bin, empty. I checked the desk. Piles of prospectuses for legitimate companies. Nothing incriminating. Then I saw it. A leather notebook, tucked under a stack of Architectural Digest magazines on the side table. Mark never read design magazines. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Handwritten. Columns of numbers, dates, and initials. AH, $15,000. 1002 AH, $22,000. 1015 AH, $50,000. 1101 AH. Apex Holdings, the LLC that owned the Perry Street apartment. But where was the money coming from? I looked at the left column, client 409, client 221. These were client codes from his firm. He was siphoning money from client accounts, likely elderly or passive accounts, and funneling it into Apex Holdings. This wasn't just adultery. This was embezzlement. This was federal prison time. I felt sick. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a criminal. He had built our life, and his secret life, on stolen money. If this came out, everything would be seized. The penthouse, the accounts, my reputation. Everything would be gone. I would be the wife of a felon. I heard the water stop in the master bathroom. I quickly put the notebook back exactly as I found it. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my jeans. I walked out of the study and sat on the sofa in the living room, grabbing a book. I opened it to a random page. The words swam before my eyes. Mark walked in 5 minutes later, toweling his hair. "Food here yet?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. "I was thinking," Mark said, sitting down in the armchair opposite me. He looked relaxed now, the earlier tension replaced by a smooth, predatory calm. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we need a break, a vacation. Just the two of us." "A vacation?" I asked, looking up. "Yeah, St. Bart's. Next month. We can reconnect. Put all this stress behind us." He was trying to manage me. He sensed I was drifting, so he was reeling me back in with promises of luxury. It was a classic manipulation tactic. "That sounds nice," I said. "Good," he smiled. "I want us to be happy, Elle. You know that, right? Everything I do for us. Everything I do for us." The lie was so grotesque it was almost impressive. He was stealing from clients to pay for a mistress in an illegitimate child, and he was framing it as doing it for us. "I know, Mark," I said. The doorbell rang. The food. We ate in silence. The pad thai tasted like cardboard. I watched him eat. I watched the way he held his fork. I realized I was looking at a sociopath. He had compartmentalized his life so completely that he probably believed his own lies. "So," he said, wiping his mouth, "about last night. You really stayed at the Carlisle?" He wasn't letting it go. "I told you," I said. "Yes. Because I checked the credit card statements this morning," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "There's no charge for the Carlisle, but there is a charge for an Uber to Brooklyn at midnight." I froze. I had used the joint Uber account. "Idiot." "Brooklyn," Mark said, leaning forward. "Who do we know in Brooklyn, Elena? Is it that architect? The one you can't stop talking about?" He knew, or he guessed. "Julian is my architect," I said, keeping my voice level. "I went to the site. I wanted to see the progress. I fell asleep in the office there." "You fell asleep at a construction site in a cocktail dress?" Mark laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Do you think I'm stupid?" "I think you're paranoid," I countered. "Maybe because you have a guilty conscience?" "Don't turn this on me." He slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled. "You're the one sneaking around. You're the one smelling like cheap paint and guilt. Did you sleep with him?" The question hung there, vibrating in the air. Did you sleep with him? I looked him in the eye. I thought about the ledger in the study. I thought about the receipts. I thought about Perry Street. If I admitted it, I lost the moral high ground. If I denied it, he would keep digging. "No," I said firmly, "I didn't." It was a lie. But in a war, truth is just another weapon, and I wasn't handing mine over to the enemy. Mark stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. He was searching for a tick, a flinch. I gave him nothing. I channeled every ounce of my social training, every year of fake smiles and polite nods into that one moment of absolute stonewalling. "Fine," he said, leaning back. "Fine." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. The trust was gone on both sides. We were two enemies trapped in a glass cage, circling each other, waiting for the other to bleed. "I'm going to the study," he said, standing up. "I have work to do. Don't wait up." "I won't," I said. He walked into his study and closed the door. I heard the lock click. I sat alone at the table. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I had to get out. Not just for a night. I had to get out of the marriage. But I couldn't just leave. If I left now, he would destroy me. He would cut off my access to funds. He would slander me. He would win. I needed leverage. I needed that ledger. I looked at the closed study door. I needed to get that book, and I needed to get it to a lawyer. But first, I needed to make sure he didn't empty the accounts before I could freeze them. Picked up my phone. I texted Dalton. I need a forensic accountant. Fast. Then I texted Julian. He knows. Be careful. I deleted the texts immediately. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were blurring through the glass. I was trapped in the sky with a criminal who happened to be my husband. The interrogation was over, but the war had just begun. The envelope from Dalton arrived on Tuesday. It didn't come by mail. A courier on a bicycle handed it to me directly outside my office building. It was thick, heavy, and sealed with red tape. It felt like holding a bomb. I didn't open it in the office. I couldn't risk my assistant seeing my hands shake. I walked to a small, nondescript coffee shop 2 blocks away, sat in the back corner, and ordered a black tea I had no intention of drinking. I slid a fingernail under the flap and tore it open. Photos spilled out onto the Formica table. Grainy telephoto lens shots, but clear enough. Mark, walking down Perry Street. Mark unlocking the black door of the brownstone. Mark walking out of the brownstone holding hands with a woman. I picked up the photo of the woman. She was young, maybe 25. She had long blonde hair and a soft, round face. She wasn't wearing couture. She was wearing a floral maternity dress, and she was heavily pregnant. I stared at the image. The curve of her belly was undeniable. 6 months, maybe 7. The world stopped. The noise of the coffee shop, the grinder, the chatter, the traffic fell away into a vacuum of silence. A baby. He wasn't just having sex. He was building a family. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was designing his penthouse, while I was worrying about his stress levels, he was preparing to be a father with someone else. I looked at the next photo. Mark was touching her stomach. He was smiling, a genuine, tender smile I hadn't seen in 5 years. Nausea rolled over me, violent and sudden. I pushed the photos back into the envelope, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The embezzlement, the cash withdrawals, the Apex Holdings, LLC. It all made sense now. He wasn't stealing money to buy sports cars or gamble. He was stealing to fund a legacy. He was stealing to pay for the child he actually wanted, with the woman he actually loved. I was the bank. I was the cover story. I was the barren wife in the ivory tower who kept the social circles happy while he lived his real life in the West Village. I felt a profound sense of hollowness. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. Heartbreak implies there is something left to break. This was total erasure. I sat there for an hour. I watched the steam rise from my tea and vanish. I was calculating. If I divorced him for adultery, I would get a settlement. But if I exposed the embezzlement, the assets would be frozen. The government would take everything. The Perry Street brownstone would be seized. The mistress would be left with nothing, and I would be left with nothing. Mutually assured destruction. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. I need to see you. Tonight, my place. I looked at the screen. I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it cut through the numbness. Julian. He was the only bright spot in this nightmare. But looking at the photo of Mark's happy face, I realized something terrifying. I was doing the exact same thing Mark was doing. I was using Julian to feel better. I was using him as an escape hatch. I was building a fantasy life in Brooklyn to avoid the reality of my life in Manhattan. I wasn't in love with Julian. I was in love with the way he looked at me. I was in love with the idea of being rescued. But no one was coming to rescue me. I had to rescue myself. I gathered the photos, put them in my bag, and stood up. I hailed a cab to Brooklyn. When I got to Julian's loft, the door was unlocked. He was waiting for me. He had cleaned up. The blueprints were gone from the table. There was a bottle of wine open and 2 glasses. He had even shaved. He looked hopeful. It broke my heart. "Hey," he said, walking over to kiss me. I turned my cheek so his lips landed near my ear. He froze, then pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Did he find out more?" "He has a baby," I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. "Or he will soon. She's pregnant. 7 months." Julian's face fell. "Elena. God, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, walking past him to the window. I looked out at the gritty street below. It clarifies things, it explains the money, it explains the lies. It means you can leave him, Julian said, stepping closer. You have proof now. You can get a divorce. You can take him for everything he has. It's not that simple, I said. He's embezzling money. If I expose him, the feds get involved. There won't be anything left to take. So what? Julian asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Forget the money. Who cares about the money? You're free, Elena. You can walk away. You can come here. I turned to face him. Come here? And do what, Julian? Live in a construction zone? Pretend I'm 22 again? The words were cruel, and I saw them land like physical blows. Julian flinched. I thought... He started, then stopped. He took a breath. I thought we had something. I thought what happened the other night meant something to you. It did, I said. It meant I wasn't dead. It meant I could still feel. But that's it, he asked, his voice rising. I was just a defibrillator, a way to jumpstart your heart so you could go back to fighting your war? I am at war, Julian, I said coldly. And in a war, you don't have time for this. I gestured vaguely at the apartment, at him. For love? He challenged. Is that what you mean? You don't have time for something real? I don't know what real is anymore, I shouted. My husband has a second family. My life is a fraud. I'm about to destroy a man I spent 10 years with. I am not fit for human consumption right now, Julian. I am toxic. I don't care, he said stubbornly. I can handle it. I can help you. No, you can't, I said, lowering my voice. Because I don't want you to. I don't want to be saved. I need to do this alone. If I come to you now, I'm just replacing one dependency with another. I'm just finding another man to define me. Julian stared at me for a long time. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a dull, aching resignation. He saw the truth. He saw that the woman who had slept in his bed 3 nights ago was gone, replaced by this cold, hard creature in a trench coat. You're going back to the penthouse, he stated. Yes. To negotiate. To finish it. He nodded slowly. He walked over to the table and picked up the wine glasses, carrying them to the sink. He poured the wine down the drain. The red liquid swirled away. You know, he said, his back to me, you talk about him like he's a monster. But you're a lot like him, Elena. You both know how to get what you want, and you don't care who gets hurt in the process. The accusation hit its mark. It was true. I had used him. I had let him fall for me because I needed his strength, and now I was discarding him because he was a liability. You're right, I whispered. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, he said, turning around. His face was closed off, stony. Just go. Before I say something I can't take back. Julian! Go, Elena! I walked to the door. I put my hand on the handle. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to tell him that he was the best thing that had happened to me in years. But that would just be more cruelty. I opened the door and walked out. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. When I got to the street, I didn't cry. I felt lighter, terrifyingly lighter. I had cut the last tether. I had no allies. I had no sanctuary. I hailed a cab. Where to? Tribeca, I said, and stop at a liquor store on the way. I needed to prepare. Tonight wasn't about love or sex or comfort. Tonight was about business. I sat in the back of the cab, clutching my bag with the photos inside. I was alone, truly, completely alone in the city of 8 million people. And for the first time, I felt strong enough to pull the trigger. The deconstruction was complete. Now I just had to clear the rubble. I was sitting in the living room when Mark came home. It was 11:45 p.m., the exact time he usually returned from his late meetings. The symmetry of it was almost poetic. I had set the stage. The lights were dimmed, not for romance, but to focus the attention on the coffee table. On the slab of white marble lay 2 things, the envelope of photos from Dalton and a single page I had photocopied from his ledger. Held a glass of scotch in my hand. I didn't drink it. I just held it, letting the condensation cool my palm. The key turned in the lock. The heavy door swung open. Mark walked in. He looked tired, rubbing his temples. He saw me sitting there and paused, sensing the ambush. He sighed, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud. If this is about the architect again, he started, loosening his tie, I really don't have the energy, Elena. I've had a hell of a day. I know, I said. My voice was quiet, steady. Sit down, Mark. I'm going to bed. Sit down, I repeated. I didn't raise my voice, but I infused it with a command that stopped him in his tracks. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something he hadn't seen before. He didn't see his wife. He saw an adversary. He walked over slowly and sat in the armchair opposite me. He looked at the table. He saw the photos. He didn't reach for them. He just stared at the top one, the image of him touching the pregnant woman's belly. His face went completely blank. No shock, no guilt, just a rapid, calculating assessment of the damage. You had me followed, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. That's illegal, Elena. Invasion of privacy. So is embezzlement, I said. That made him flinch. His eyes snapped to the second piece of paper, the photocopy of the ledger page. Client 409, Apex Holdings. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air conditioner hummed. The city outside breathed. Inside, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Mark leaned back in the chair. The exhaustion vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, reptilian alertness. The charm was gone. The perfect husband mask dissolved, revealing the man beneath, a man who looked at people and saw only leverage. You went into my study, he said softly. You broke into my safe. You left it on the table, I corrected. You got sloppy, Mark. Arrogance does that to people. He chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. He reached for the bottle of scotch on the table and poured himself a glass, ignoring the coaster. So, he said, taking a sip, here we are, the grand reveal. What do you want, Elena? You want to scream? You want to throw things? Go ahead. Get it out of your system. I don't want to scream, I said. I want to negotiate. He raised an eyebrow. Negotiate? You think this is a business deal? Isn't it? I asked. Our marriage has been a merger for years. Now we're just dissolving the partnership. I leaned forward. I know about Apex Holdings. I know you've been skimming from the dormant accounts to pay for the brownstone and the baby. I know that if the partners find out, you lose your license. If the DA finds out, you go to prison for 10 years. Mark's face hardened. You won't do that. Why wouldn't I? Because if I go down, the assets get frozen, he said, his voice dropping to a menace. The government seizes everything. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, your jewelry, your little design studio. You'll be on the street, Elena. You'll be the destitute wife of a felon. You're too fond of your comfort to burn it all down. He was right, and he knew it. He knew exactly who I was. You're right, I admitted. I don't want to be poor, but I don't want to be married to you anymore. And I certainly don't want to be the stepmother to your mistress's child. Mark swirled the liquid in his glass. Her name is Sarah, and she gives me something you never could. The words were meant to hurt. They were a precision strike at my deepest insecurity. Warmth? I asked. Admiration? A blindly uncritical audience? A family, he said brutally. A legacy. You and I, we're just statues, Elena. Beautiful, cold statues standing in a museum. Sarah is real. She needs me. And I didn't, I whispered. The crack in my armor showed for a split second. You never needed me, Mark sneered. You needed a prop. You needed a handsome husband to complete the set. We used each other, Elle. Don't pretend you're the victim here. You love the lifestyle just as much as I did. I looked at him. There was truth in his words, a twisted, ugly truth. I had loved the safety. I had loved the facade. Maybe, I said, but I never stole from old ladies to pay for it. I placed my glass on the table with a sharp click. Here is the deal, Mark. Listen closely, because I'm only going to offer it once. He watched me, his eyes narrowed. I keep the penthouse. I keep the Hamptons house. You transfer the liquid assets from our joint personal accounts to my private account by tomorrow morning. In exchange, I give you the ledger page. I don't go to the partners. I don't go to the DA. You get to walk away. You get to go to Perry Street and play daddy. You keep your job, your reputation, and your freedom. Mark laughed. You want the real estate and the cash? You're dreaming. Am I? I picked up the ledger page. I have the original in a safe deposit box. My lawyer has instructions to mail a copy to the SEC if anything happens to me, or if I don't call him by noon tomorrow to confirm the transfer. It was a bluff. I didn't have a lawyer involved yet. I had burned the original page in the sink an hour ago because I was too terrified to keep it. But Mark didn't know that. He stared at me. He was calculating the odds. He was a gambler, but he only bet when he knew he could win. This time he couldn't see my cards. You're bluffing, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Try me, I said, cold as ice. I have nothing left to lose, Mark. You took my dignity. You took my trust. You made me a joke in my own life. Do you really think I care about the money enough to save you? He looked at the photos of Sarah. He looked at his career, built on a house of cards. If I give you the penthouse, he said slowly, I want a clean divorce. No alimony, irreconcilable differences. We seal the records. Done, I said. And you never speak to Sarah. You never go near my child. I have no interest in your child, Mark. I just want you out of my life. He sat there for a long minute. The silence stretched, thin and tight as a wire. Then he finished his drink in one gulp and slammed the glass down. Fine, and he said, you win. He stood up. He walked to the bedroom. I heard him pulling a suitcase from the closet. I heard drawers opening and closing. I didn't move. I sat in the living room, listening to the sound of my marriage being packed into a Toomey bag. 10 minutes later, he walked out. He was wearing his coat. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, no regret, just a cold, hard hatred. You know, he said, his hand on the doorknob, you think you've won. You think you're free. But you're going to be alone in this big empty glass box. And that, he pointed at me, is exactly what you deserve. You're cold, Elena. You've always been cold. Goodbye, Mark, I said. He opened the door and walked out. He didn't slam it. He closed it with a soft, final click. I stared at the closed door. It was done. I stood up and walked to the door. I threw the deadbolt, then the chain, then the bottom lock. I turned around and looked at the apartment. It was massive. It was silent. The shadows stretched across the floor like long, dark fingers. Mark was right. I was alone. I had no husband. I had pushed Julian away. I had no children. I was standing in a tower of golden glass, and there was no one to hear me if I screamed. But as I looked at the white marble table, at the empty space where the photos had been, I realized something. The air didn't smell like deception anymore. It didn't smell like vanilla and lies. It was cold. It was empty, but it was clean. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was midnight. The lights of Manhattan burned on, indifferent to my tragedy. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I'm not cold, I whispered to the reflection. I'm just finally awake. I slid down to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the center of my beautiful, empty life and listened to the silence. It was terrifying, and it was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. 6 months later, the light in New York changed. The harsh gray bite of winter softened into the golden, hazy humidity of early June. The city shed its heavy coats and emerged blinking into the sun. I sat on the fire escape of my new apartment in Chelsea, a mug of tea warming my hands. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a third-floor walk-up in a brownstone that dated back to the 1920s. The floors creaked when I walked. The radiators hissed and clanked like angry ghosts. There was no doorman named Henry to shield me from the world, and I loved it. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. It was a quiet affair, handled mostly by lawyers in sterile conference rooms. I never saw Mark during the proceedings. We were just names on a docket, assets on a spreadsheet. I had sold the Tribeca penthouse. I couldn't live there. Every marble surface, every perfectly recessed light fixture reminded me of a woman I no longer knew. I took the money, a significant sum, and bought this place. It was smaller, messier, and required work. I was renovating it myself slowly, sanding the floors by hand, stripping the wallpaper. I was learning to live with the dust. I finished my tea and climbed back inside through the window. I had a meeting at 10. I had left the large firm and started my own boutique studio. Vance Interiors. Just me and a junior assistant. We focused on restoration, on bringing old, broken spaces back to life without hiding their scars. I walked to the subway. I took the train now. I liked the noise, the humanity, the lack of pretense. As I exited the station at Madison Square Park, I saw them. It was one of those cosmic coincidences that New York throws at you just to see if you're paying attention. Mark was sitting on a bench near the Shake Shack line. He was pushing a stroller back and forth with his foot. He looked older. The crisp, invincible aura of the investment banker was gone. His shirt was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive eye cream could hide. Next to him sat Sarah. She looked tired, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was feeding a baby from a bottle, looking distracted, scrolling through her phone. They didn't look like a tragic romance. They didn't look like the villains in my story. They just looked like two exhausted parents trying to survive a Tuesday morning. I stopped by a tree watching them. I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the bile, the jealousy, the desire to scream. But nothing came. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet pity. Mark had blown up his life to find this mundane, messy reality. He had traded a partner for a dependent. He had traded his freedom for a legacy that was currently crying over spilled milk. He looked up then. His eyes scanned the crowd, seeking something, anything to distract him from the monotony. For a split second, his gaze locked with mine. He froze. His foot stopped rocking the stroller. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with clear, calm eyes. I saw the regret flash across his face, sharp and undeniable. He saw the woman he had lost, standing in the sunlight, looking stronger than he had ever seen her. He opened his mouth, perhaps to say my name, but Sarah nudged him, handing him a burp cloth. The moment broke. He turned back to his new life. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. He was a chapter I had finished writing. My meeting was in Soho, not far from Green Street. After it wrapped up, a successful pitch to a gallery owner who wanted to expose the original brick walls, I found myself walking toward the old construction site. The building was finished now. The scaffolding was down. It was a gleaming, high-end retail space with luxury lofts above. I stood across the street admiring the facade. The ironwork had been restored perfectly. The history was honored, not erased. It turned out well, didn't it? I didn't jump. I knew that voice. It was deep, rough, and familiar. I turned. Julian was standing a few feet away. He was wearing a hard hat under his arm, holding a roll of blueprints. He looked exactly the same. Messy hair, sawdust on his jeans, eyes that saw too much. It did, I said. You saved the cast iron. And the floors, he added. Hand sanded. Took forever. Worth it, I said. He looked at me, his hazel eyes searching my face. He wasn't looking at my clothes or my hair. He was checking the structural integrity. You look real, he said finally. I feel real, I replied. I'm living in Chelsea now. A walk-up. The plumbing is a nightmare. He smiled, a genuine, slow smile. Sounds perfect. It is. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy with memory. I remembered the rain, the whiskey, the desperate night in his bed. I remembered how I had hurt him. I'm sorry, I said softly, for how I left things. Don't be, Julian said. He shifted his weight. You had to tear it down, Elena. I was just the sledgehammer. You can't live with the sledgehammer once the house is built. It was a gracious way to let me off the hook. It was a kindness I probably didn't deserve. Are you okay? I asked. I'm good, mate, he said. Busy. Another building. Another restoration. There's always something broken in this city that needs fixing. He checked his watch. I have to meet a contractor. Go, I said. He nodded. He took a step away, then paused. Elena? Yes? You were never the vinyl, he said. You were always the oak underneath. You just needed to scrape off the layers. My throat tightened. Thank you, Julian. He gave me a quick, sharp nod, a salute from one survivor to another, and turned the corner. He didn't look back. He walked away with that loose, easy stride, disappearing into the crowd of tourists and shoppers. I stood there for a moment, letting the feeling wash over me. I wasn't going to chase him. We weren't meant to be together. He was the catalyst, not the destination. I turned and started walking uptown. The city was loud. Sirens wailed, taxis honked, people shouted into their phones. It was chaotic and aggressive. But for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't trying to filter it out. I wasn't trying to curate it into something polite. I walked past a flower shop. Buckets of peonies were sitting out on the sidewalk. Bright pink, messy, exploding with petals. Mark used to buy me white lilies. Stiff, architectural, odorless. I stopped and bought a bunch of the pink peonies. I buried my face in them, inhaling the sweet, heavy scent. I continued walking. I was 33 years old. I was divorced. I lived in a third-floor walk-up. I had dinner for one waiting for me, and as I crossed 14th Street, stepping into the sun, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't acting. There was no audience. There was no script. The long midnight was over. I adjusted my grip on the flowers, lifted my chin, and walked into the dawn.